I was born into wealth, not just comfort or convenience, but the kind of wealth that commanded respect the moment people heard my father's name. My father, Mr. Desmond Williams, was a man whose reputation in the business world stretched far beyond our city. He was a shrewd businessman, a respected leader in his industry, and a man whose handshake carried promises people could trust. My mother, Mrs. Grace Williams, was the perfect picture of elegance and strength, the kind of woman whose grace silenced the room the moment she walked in. Together, they were a power couple, admired by many and envied by just as much. And then there was me, Mirabelle, their only child. From the very beginning, my parents made me the center of their world. I was the dream they had longed for after years of marriage. My father often told the story of how he had prayed for a daughter, how he whispered promises to God that if he was blessed with one, he would love her with everything in him. My mother's friends often recalled how she glowed like the sun the moment I was placed in her arms at birth. Because I was an only child, they poured all their love, their care, and their resources into me. Growing up, I never knew what it meant to lack. I had toys imported from countries I had never even visited. My birthdays were grand events that could easily pass as weddings. Beautifully decorated gardens, expensive cakes taller than me, and entertainers hired just to keep me smiling. I remember at age 6, I told my father I wanted a pony, and within the week, a small stable had been built in our compound with not just one, but 2 ponies. At age 9, I told my mother I wanted to learn ballet after watching it on television, and by the next month, I had my own private ballet instructor. My father often said, "Anything for my little princess," and he meant every word. My parents pampered me in every way possible. I was driven to school by a personal driver, escorted by security guards, and often picked up before other students just to avoid the stress of waiting in line. I wore designer clothes that stood out, and my school shoes were shipped from Italy when other children wore what their parents could afford from the local market. At home, I had nannies who attended to me, cooks who prepared whatever I craved, and workers who ran errands at my command. It wasn't that I asked for these things, it was that they were given to me, and soon I grew to expect them. As a child, I had dreams like every other little girl. I dreamed of becoming a famous actress, of having my name in lights, of traveling the world and being adored by fans. I would stand in front of the mirror wearing my mother's heels, pretending to give acceptance speeches, while my father clapped and laughed at my theatrics. I dreamed of being the kind of girl everyone wanted to be like, and in many ways, I was already living that life in my little world. But somewhere along the line, something in me changed. The little girl who laughed freely and hugged her parents at every opportunity slowly turned into someone else. Maybe it was the constant pampering. Maybe it was the knowledge that no matter what I did, my parents would defend me. Or maybe it was the way people treated me differently because of my father's wealth. Whatever it was, it began to poison me, and my attitude shifted from sweet innocence to arrogant entitlement. If you are still watching to this stage, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share to your friends and family. This might be what they need. And most importantly, hit the notifications button below to be notified whenever we drop a new episode of You Are Not Alone. At first, it was little things. Rolling my eyes when someone corrected me, refusing to say thank you when something was handed to me, mocking other kids in school because their shoes weren't as fine as mine. My parents brushed it off as childishness, believing I would outgrow it. But I didn't. I grew worse. I began to see everyone around me as beneath me. Our workers were my favorite targets. I disrespected them without hesitation. I remember vividly one afternoon when an old business partner of my father visited our home. He was a man in his 60s with gray hair and gentle eyes. I had seen him around before, and I knew my father respected him deeply. But when he tried to greet me warmly, calling me my little princess, I frowned and said coldly, Don't call me that. You're not my father." The man laughed it off awkwardly, but I saw the flash of embarrassment in his eyes. My father looked at me with disbelief, his jaw tight, but because we had guests, he said nothing. Later that night, my mother tried to talk to me about it. She said, "Mirabel, that was very disrespectful. You don't talk to your father's guests like that." I shrugged and muttered, "He's just an old man. Why should I care what he thinks?" My parents exchanged worried looks, but as always, they said no more. Another time, I slapped our cook because she had made the stew too spicy. I can still see her startled face, the way her hands flew to her cheek as tears welled in her eyes. She bowed repeatedly, apologizing for the mistake, but I stormed out of the kitchen screaming, "Are you trying to poison me, useless woman?" My mother heard the commotion and came rushing in, but instead of scolding me, she hugged me and told the cook to be more careful next time. The woman avoided my eyes for weeks after that, but I didn't care. The arrogance only deepened. One evening, after returning from a shopping trip, I got down from the car and found the gateman standing sluggishly by the gate. I had called him several times before he opened, and in my anger, I struck him on the shoulder with my handbag. "Are you deaf? Must you always behave like a fool?" I shouted. The man bowed his head in silence, but the shame in his eyes was evident. He had worked for my family for years, but to me, he was nothing. My parents noticed the pattern and grew deeply worried. They tried to talk to me several times. One night, they called me into the sitting room. My father's voice was stern, and my mother's eyes were tired with worry. My father began, "Mirabel, we need to talk. You are not a child anymore. You are 18 and your behavior is becoming a problem. The way you treat people, our workers, our friends, even us, it's wrong. Money and comfort do not last forever, but respect and character do. You are bringing shame to us, to yourself." I crossed my arms and leaned back in the sofa, rolling my eyes. My mother added softly, "We love you, Mirabel. You are our only child, our pride, but you cannot keep living like this. People are talking. Even the workers are afraid of you. This is not the daughter we raised." I stood up, my heart filled with irritation, not remorse. "Are you done?" I asked coldly. My father's eyes widened in shock, and my mother whispered my name, but I didn't care. I turned my back on them, walked out of the sitting room, and slammed the door behind me, leaving them in silence. For me, it was just another night. For them, it was the moment they realized their daughter was slipping beyond their control. And that was only the beginning.
It happened on a Tuesday morning. I remember the way the light came through the classroom windows, gold and sharp, as if the day itself wanted to spotlight me. Mr. Okoye was at the front of the room, chalk in hand, trying to turn numbers into something tolerable. I had been making jokes with my friends, tossing remarks like little stones to watch people jump. He stopped the lesson and, with that careful patience he was known for, said, "Mirabel, please stop interrupting. You can speak after class." That little line, "after class," felt to me like an insult. Who was he, a man I'd seen smile politely at my father at PTA meetings, to tell me when I could speak? My mouth got hot, my breath shallow. The eyes of the class shifted toward me like lights focusing on a stage. I straightened, stood, and the words came out before I thought them. "Respect? You speak to me like I'm nothing." He took a step forward, trying to calm the situation. "Mirabel, you will not speak to me that way. Apologize and sit down." Apologize. The word lodged in my throat like a bitter pill. I had never apologized for being myself. Pride flared up bright and stupid. I strode to his desk, and with a certainty that felt like power, I slapped him. The sound of my hand against his cheek was loud enough that for a heartbeat the world stopped, and then resumed in a rush of gasps and clicks, the kind of noise that follows something taboo. He touched his face, shock and hurt crossing his features. I felt nothing but a triumphant surge, the brief, addictive high of making people recoil. I wanted it to sting, to make him feel small the way I had been taught to make others feel.
My classmates sat frozen, some covering their mouths, others staring as if I were a thunderbolt. The principal called me to her office. Sitting there in the stiff leather chair, the principal's face was a study in professional sorrow. 3 weeks suspension, she said. Her voice was a violin string pulled too tight. I scoffed inwardly. Suspension was an inconvenience. We had navigated worse. My father's name was a key that unlocked doors. This would be no different. The next day, he arrived. My father walked into the office like a man used to changing weather, smooth and confident. He spoke softly, with an authority that made the principal's posture ease. Apologies, promises of compensation for any trouble, assurances of discipline. His words wrapped around the problem like practiced hands. By noon, the suspension was softened to a lecture and some community service hours we could arrange elsewhere. I felt invincible again. He had cleared it away as he always did. On the drive home that afternoon, I could feel my triumph like jewelry. But the triumphant glow dimmed when my parents' faces held a weariness I had rarely seen. "This stops now," my mother whispered in the car, her fingers white around a tissue. My father's jaw set in thought. I rolled my eyes. "That school is beneath me," I said, loud enough for them to hear. "I'm not going back there." In the end, they chose to transfer me to a more exclusive school, one supposedly suited for girls of our standing, a place where infractions were smoothed over and reputations preserved. I thought it was the perfect solution. New place, new people, same me. For all my arrogance, I liked familiar comforts. I liked the way the world danced the way I expected it to. Barely a week after starting the new school, something small lit a fuse. A girl named Ifunanya had laughed at me while I read in class. The laugh was quick, a small thing, but it felt to me like a public affront, unforgivable. My blood rose. We argued after class, words flying like knives. She laughed again, and my control slipped. I don't know if it was the delay of the driver, the hum of a heady week of privilege, or the small cruelty of a laugh, but I grabbed my lunch bag, my father's idea of a stylish accessory, and hit her with it hard. The bag's strap whipped across her temple, and she went down like a puppet with its strings cut. The corridor filled with the awful sound of bodies rushing, of someone calling her name, and the weight of what I'd done dropped like a boulder to the floor of my chest. They carried her out in a flurry, teachers, the principal, a gash of parents gathering at the gates. Her lips were pale, and for the first time, my stomach turned with a nausea I had never felt after a fight. The ambulance came because the school nurse said the girl had fainted. The ambulance took her to the hospital with sirens screaming through streets I thought I owned. At the hospital, doctors worked with a calm urgency that turned the bright lights into a different world, one where my actions had consequences beyond gossip and apologies. The police came the next morning. Someone had decided to press charges. My father hugged the victim's mother in a display that would make any furious parent's anger tilt away. He paid bills, arranged tests, and promised whatever it took. My mother cried and begged. The victim's parents were polite but desperate. Money could not unpair the fear that had squeezed their throats. Yet after hours of pleading, after promises and tears, they accepted an arrangement: the hospital bills, compensation, and a public apology. The police agreed to a settlement. I was released on bail. My chest felt like a cage with breath trapped inside. It should have been the end, an ugly, teachable moment, but for me, it was only the beginning of a spiral that I would later look back on and flinch at. That night, I walked onto the balcony because the house felt heavy with something I couldn't name. The chandeliers glinted, but the glow could not reach inside my head. Under the silver smear of the moon, I felt unusually small for someone who had never been small. An idea slipped into my thoughts then, dark and oily. Maybe if others could be ruined by me, then maybe I could ruin myself. Maybe I could take away the shame I'd caused another person by answering in a way so final that it closed the matter forever. I walked to the railing and put my palm on the cool metal. The city sprawled below, lights tiny as fallen stars. The wind moved my hair across my face like a hand trying to coax me away from the edge. My legs trembled, the city noise a distant hum. I thought, for the fraction of a second, about what would happen if I let go. The thought tasted of release and flame. I climbed onto the low wall, breathing shallow and fast, clinging to the sill with the grip of someone already floating. A maid spotted me. Her shriek was a raw sound that split the night. In seconds, my whole life condensed into a frantic scramble, my mother's shoes slapping the hallway, my father's voice a broken thing, their hands on me begging, "Don't, Mirabelle, please, we love you," my mother sobbed. The panic and pleading were like floodwaters. They pulled at me in a way nothing else ever had. For the first time, vulnerability opened like a wound and I stepped down, numb and shaking. They took me to the hospital that night, not for stitches or tests, but to be seen by psychiatrists who asked measured questions about moods and thoughts. I sat under their calm lights and told them nothing. Every question they posed about how often I felt sad, about whether I had planned to hurt myself, felt like an accusation. I snapped each time, furious at their soft tones. "You don't know me," I told one doctor, throwing my aloneness like a weapon. He tried to keep his voice steady. "We want to help, Mirabelle." I pushed him away and stormed out, heels clicking against tile like the final words in an argument. At home, the atmosphere shifted from flippant to frayed. My mother hovered like a ghost in rooms where laughter once lived. My father's hands, so steady in business, trembled at the edges at night. They hired counselors, psychiatrists, people whose names were printed on glossy pamphlets with testimonials and photos of serene faces. I disagreed with every one of them. A counselor asked me to write about my feelings. I filled the page with sarcasm. A psychiatrist asked about my childhood. I dismissed it all as irrelevant. In my mind, they were treating a problem that didn't exist because it was easier to admit I had one than to face what it would mean to change. Rumors rippled through our friends and our social circles like a contagion. "Is she okay?" people asked at charity galas, whispering as if the right word might infect them. We had to choose our outings carefully, and some invitations stopped coming. My parents were mortified. I could see it when my father's grip tightened on the steering wheel, or when my mother practiced smiles in the mirror until her cheeks tired. They tried to salvage what they still could: new rules, stricter supervision, curfews, and more talks. The talks were the worst. The talks felt like interrogation rather than love. They wanted me to apologize publicly, to attend the rehabilitation program they had paid for, to speak softly and be humble. I couldn't. Humility had no store in me. The nights got longer with the weight of their disappointment. I began to see the world in sharp black and white, where every demand for contrition felt like a demand for the death of my identity. When the maid served the wrong plate of food, I threw it at the wall. When the gardener trimmed the hedges in a pattern I didn't like, I had him redo it, berating him until his eyes brimmed. The workers shuffled around us like people treading on eggshells. Once the neighbor's boy accidentally bumped my hand while passing a cake. I slapped him hard enough to send his face crooked. His mother came to the gate weeks later with eyes full of cold. My parents apologized again, with gifts and explanations. Each apology was another stitch sewn into a wound that wouldn't heal. Their patience thinned into a thread. I noticed it like a sudden chill in summer. There were meetings that I would overhear, my parents in their study late at night, voices low and urgent. "We've tried everything," my mother said so quiet the paper almost swallowed the words. "Money, counselors, transfers, nothing works." My father's reply was a single, tired sound. "We cannot keep carrying this." They talked about stricter measures, about boarding schools far away, places where children were made to face the consequences of their actions without the cushion of influence. They spoke of limits and ultimatums, terms I'd never really understood until their voices made them concrete. I listened from the hallway, and for a moment, a small, hot thing, fear, flickered in me. It was not contrition. Fear is often crueler. One night, after I had stormed out of the house mid-argument, my mother's complaints about my behavior and my father's weary counsel falling from their mouths like rain, I found myself at the far end of the garden, face tilted to the sky. The world felt brittle. My anger at them and the world mingled with a strange, heavy sadness that I kept punching down with sarcasm and scorn. I wanted to be seen in the worst possible way, and I wanted the pain I had given others to be answered by a pain that was mine and mine alone. That was the pattern. I hurt others to feel alive, then I recoiled at the consequences and lashed out at whatever hand reached for me. My parents were exhausted from reaching. They had always been able to fix things with their pockets and presents, but this was not a stain you could clean with money. This was a splinter lodged under skin. Their confusion was raw and human. They had been stumped before, business enemies, scandals, betrayals from partners, but never the quiet, gnawing grief of parenting someone who refused to accept help. I watched them fold and refold their strategies. They met with teachers, met with psychologists, insisted on meetings where my behavior would be discussed like a board agenda. Each suggested solution was a bandage that didn't fit the wound. In my mind, they were treating a problem that didn't exist, because it was easier to admit I had one than to face what it would mean to change. So they reached a point, tired, confused, hearts heavy with repeated apologies and public statements, that their patience had become a brittle thing ready to crack.
It started on a Friday evening, just as the sun was melting into the horizon, filling the living room with warm orange light. My father called me downstairs, his voice unusually calm. When I entered the living room, I found him and my mother sitting close together on the couch, their eyes fixed on me with a kind of gentle seriousness I rarely saw. For a second, I thought I was in trouble again, but then my mother smiled softly, and my father spoke words that sent a shiver of excitement through my entire body. "Mirabel," he said, leaning forward, "your grandfather in the village has asked to see you. He has been longing for you, and he sent word that he wants to spend some time with you." I froze, blinking at them in disbelief. "Grandfather? My grandfather wants to see me?" For as long as I could remember, I had longed to meet him. I had seen his pictures and old albums, a stern yet wise man who sat with a walking stick in front of a clay house. I'd heard stories from relatives, how he used to be a respected elder, how his words carried weight in the community. But my parents had always kept me away from the village, saying it was too harsh for me, that I wouldn't cope. Yet here they were, telling me the one thing I had secretly wanted for so long. My chest tightened with excitement, and for the first time in months, I smiled a real smile. "So, he really asked for me? He wants to see me?" I asked again, my voice trembling with joy. "Yes, my dear," my mother said, patting my hand. "He asked specifically for you. He said the time has come for you to finally meet him." I couldn't believe it. I had waited all my life for this moment, and now it was finally happening. For once, it felt like something good had fallen into my lap. Not a punishment, not a lecture, not another scandal to clean up. Just the chance to meet the grandfather I had dreamed of. The next morning, my father gave instructions that puzzled me. He told me not to pack any clothes. He said, "We will be coming back the same day, no need for luggage, and leave your phone behind too. The network in the village is poor, and it will just be a distraction." I frowned. "What do you mean I can't pack clothes? What if I need to freshen up? What if I want to take pictures with grandfather? And why can't I carry my phone? I always carry my phone." The argument stretched for almost an hour. I refused at first, my stubbornness burning like fire, but they kept insisting gently, reminding me that it was only for one day, that I would be back in my room by evening. At last, reluctantly, I gave in. My desire to meet my grandfather was stronger than my attachment to my phone or clothes. With a heavy sigh, I agreed. "Fine, but I still think it's weird," I muttered. The journey to the village was long, the air thick with the smell of dust and earth.
As the car rolled past farmlands and huts, I stared out the window, my heart beating faster with anticipation. I imagined myself running into my grandfather's arms, listening to his stories, maybe even sitting under a tree while he blessed me. The picture was perfect in my head, and I held on to it like a lifeline. When we finally arrived, it was not at a big family compound or a grand house as I had imagined. Instead, we stopped in a small hut on the edge of the village, its roof patched with rusty zinc and its walls faded with age. I looked around, confused. This didn't look like the home of the grandfather I had always pictured. "Why here?" I asked, my voice uncertain. My father only smiled faintly. "This is where we are meeting him." We stepped inside and were welcomed by an old woman with wrinkled skin and bright, knowing eyes. She wore a faded wrapper tied around her chest, and her smile revealed a few missing teeth. She greeted my parents warmly, then looked at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. I waited for my grandfather to appear, but he never did. The woman and my parents spoke in low tones for a while, their voices blending with the faint crackle of a fire in the corner. I didn't understand what was going on. Then, suddenly, my parents stood up to leave. I rose too, eager to follow them. But just as I was about to step outside, a tall man from the village blocked my path. His hand gripped my arm firmly, not aggressively, but in a way that told me I wasn't going anywhere. I looked at my parents in shock, my heart pounding. "Daddy, Mommy, what's happening? Why is he holding me? Aren't we going back home?" They didn't answer the way I wanted. My mother's eyes glistened with tears. My father's jaw was tight with resolve. "Forgive us, Maribel," my father said quietly. "This is for your own good. You will stay here for some time. We will come back for you." Before I could protest further, they turned and walked away, their figures fading into the dust as the car drove off. I screamed, I cried, I begged them to come back, but the car didn't stop. The reality hit me like a blow. They had tricked me. They had brought me here and left me behind. I cried until my throat was raw, my tears soaking my dress. I felt betrayed in the deepest way possible. How could they do this to me? How could they abandon me in this strange, harsh place? But no matter how much I cried, the truth remained the same. I was stuck here now, and there was nothing I could do about it. The old woman, whose name I later learned was Mama Ife, tried to comfort me. She gave me food, steaming yam porridge served in a clay bowl, but I pushed it away. "I can't eat this. Do you know the kind of meals I eat at home? I can't eat this village food." That night, she laid a mat for me on the floor of her hut. The mat was thin, rough against my skin, and the floor felt hard as stone. I sat upright all night, refusing to lie down. I had never slept on the floor in my life, and I swore I never would. I stayed awake, sulking, my body aching with exhaustion, but my pride refusing to let me rest. The first few days were unbearable. The hut was small, the nights were filled with the sounds of crickets and distant drums, and the mornings began before dawn. Mama Ife expected me to fetch water from the stream, sweep the compound, and help with cooking. I refused at first, folding my arms and declaring, "I'm not your maid." She only looked at me with patient eyes, never raising her voice. But the village was relentless. Hunger gnawed at me when I refused to eat. Thirst scorched my throat when I refused to fetch water. Slowly, I realized that my arrogance would not feed me here, nor would it shield me from the reality of this life. So, reluctantly at first, I began to bend. I fetched water from the stream, stumbling with the heavy clay pot balanced on my head. I cooked simple meals under the guidance of Mama Ife, learning how to stir with wooden spoons over open fire. I swept the compound, washed clothes by hand, and learned to sit on the mat without complaint. Each task felt like a battle at first, but over time, it became part of me. Along the way, I met other children in the village, girls who laughed easily, boys who climbed trees without fear. They didn't care that I came from the city. They welcomed me into their games. We played under the scorching sun, our laughter echoing through the fields. At night, when we gathered by the fire, I told them stories of my life in the city, my big house, my gadgets, my clothes. Their eyes widened with wonder, and for the first time, I felt joy not from mocking or hurting others, but from sharing. Slowly, something inside me began to change. I started asking myself questions late at night. Who am I without my parents' money? What have I really gained from all my pride and arrogance? Why did I always hurt people? The answers were not easy, but they came, piece by piece, like fragile dawn breaking after a long night. Then, just as I was beginning to feel like I had found a new rhythm, tragedy struck. One morning, Mama Ife fell ill. At first, it was just a cough, then fever, then weakness that left her unable to rise from her mat. I did everything I could, cooked her meals, fetched herbs the villagers suggested, prayed by her side, but nothing worked. After a few days, she closed her eyes and never opened them again. I wept like I had never wept before. This old woman who had taken me in when I was nothing but an arrogant, spoiled child was gone. She had been my only guide, my only companion in this strange world, and now she was no more. I felt empty, lost, and alone all over again. Her burial was simple, the whole village coming together to mourn her. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, realizing how much she had meant to me. She had been strict, yet patient, harsh, yet loving. She had taught me more in those few months than I had learned in all my years of privilege. Losing her broke something in me, but it also built something new. Weeks passed after her burial, and then one morning I heard the familiar sound of a car pulling into the compound. My parents had come back. I rushed out, my heart beating fast. When they stepped out of the car and saw me, their eyes widened in shock. I was no longer the girl they had brought here. I stood tall, my eyes softer, my voice respectful. I greeted them properly, bowing my head, and for the first time, they saw a daughter transformed. We embraced, all three of us, crying in each other's arms. My father whispered, "My daughter, my Mirabelle," and my mother held me tightly, as if afraid to let go. They could hardly believe the change, but it was real. I was no longer the arrogant, reckless girl who slapped teachers and fought classmates. I was someone new, someone who had tasted humility, hardship, and love in its purest form. In that moment, I knew that life had finally taught me its greatest lesson: respect, humility, and the value of others. And for the first time, I was truly happy.